everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of my Genealogy Live interview YouTubers, or Genealogy YouTubers edition. Haven't come up with a very formal name, but anyway. So tonight I have the host of How We Got Here, which is the podcast and the YouTube channel, and I'm joined by its host, Brian Nash. Hello, Brian.
Hi, Daniel. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. A bit tired, but life. Anyway, so for anyone at home not necessarily know you and your podcast and YouTube channel, could you give a bit of an introduction to yourself?
Sure. I'm located in Prince Edward Island, Canada. It's not where I'm originally from, or I'm actually the only person in my family that's in Prince Edward Island. But I consider myself a Celtic Canadian. My mom's side was all from Scotland. My father's side was all from Ireland, and I started dabbling in genealogy probably really about my second year of university. Sort of played around with it for a little, then put it aside, and every so often just added to it. And for the last few years, I've sort of just been really getting serious. My podcast is a genealogy, also local history centered on how people's ancestors arrived in the Atlantic Canada, sort of trying to tell the stories of how they got there. That was my original intent. My YouTube channel does a variety of different things, where I'll talk about anything from DNA. I will I reformatted my podcasts for video, for a few of them for the channel, and I've done some just really fun things like play some geography games, just because they're kind of interesting, and as a genealogist, it's good to know your geography, and so you have an understanding of where places are, and so I'm all about trying to help people get to their roots, especially in North America. We tend to forget that our families haven't always been here, or even if we're aware of it, unless they've come in the last generation or two, we kind of don't pay much attention to it. And to me, it's really important. Once heard say, if you don't know where you come from, you can't figure out where you're going. So
yeah. And I mean, I can't really say for mine, because I mean, my father's side have been in part of Mayo for generations. I don't think they've ever moved. Like they were just plump there and just decided, right, we're going to stay here and nobody's going to move. So it kind of made it a bit easy to find people, but also a bit irritating at some point, where it's just like, can you please go places? But no, that's just my personal beef with my family. So what got you into genealogy?
Well, my dad was in the Canadian Armed Forces, so I lived in a lot of places in Canada. So it used to be at one point, you asked me where I was from, I'd just say name a year, because I didn't really have roots of my own. I knew where my parents were from, so my grandparents. But I really wanted to try to identify myself as being from a place, so that really got me interested. I knew a little of my family history. I had a family tree that had been passed down that I was really interested in on my grandfather's paternal side. And so that got me interested, but I hadn't really known a lot of the history of the rest of my family. So it was really originally about a personal journey, trying to find out who I am. Because I couldn't say I was from a certain place, even though I was born a certain place. I only lived there for a year and a half of a year and not even 2 years, and then moved, and then the rest of my life until my 20s was moving around from place to place every few years. So I never really identified, sort of identified my parents' family, where they were from, but I really wanted to know more. And I've always been a history buff. I love history. I studied medieval history in university. So of course the first thing I did out of university, I got a job working in IT for Department of National Defense. But it's what all medieval historians, I think, aspire to do. But no, history's just always been something I've really liked, and I really like the personal aspect of it. Getting to know people's stories, not just learning dates and things, but trying to find out what it was like to live in that time, what people were thinking, what people were doing, because often that's missed. When you study history, you learn about the kings, the queens, the wars and stuff, but you don't often get a lot of the personal stories. And so genealogy was sort of a natural fit into all of that for me.
Yeah. I think that's like a quotation. I can't remember who said it, but it's kind of like, history only remembers, genealogy remembers them all. That sort of,
Yeah.
I think that was a quote or something to that effect. But, and it is true, because like in history, you don't really do. Right, and today we're going to learn about the ordinary life of a farmer in Cork.
Yep.
I don't know. And or a or jeweler in Dublin or something, or a sailor in Waterford, which is on the coast, or just a plain old labourer up in Mayo. Like it varies. So I mean, I don't know, but yeah, it is.
And a lot of the history people learn, it's not actually their history, in the sense that that they learn the big picture, but they don't know what brought their families to where they are, or what, like you said, what they were doing for a living, and what that actually looked like. Or
Yeah, there is that too. So, what resources have you found most helpful in your research?
you know it depends. Definitely, the internet makes things a lot easier. And it honestly depends what aspect I'm looking at. One thing that I think is an overlooked resource that people don't always pay attention to is church records. And I'm not talking birth, marriages, and even community records. Reading meetings of a church council or a presbytery of what happened during a certain time. You can get information. You can get information about your family. One of the things I've always loved doing is walking through graveyards. It's there's so much history in graveyards, not even related to your own, but just even you start to realize by looking at the graves. Oh, during this period, seemed to be a lot of young people's, a lot of infant graves, or you can see periods where that during a certain period there's a lot more than others. So was there some type of disease or something going through the area, and just getting familiar with the names of people that were there. I discovered something. My son was actually doing the caretaking for a church down the road for us, and we uncovered a gravestone that had been sort of buried over. It was just a footstone. It was actually from a German sergeant from World War II that had died. They were on Prince Edward Island at a prison camp, which is something I was not even aware that there had been in this area. So you can just from seeing those type of things. You know, the best resources are your family if they're up to it, at least for getting started. You know, the usual records. I really like. You know, I really like Scotland's people for getting records from Scotland. I find it's laid out pretty easy, pretty good to use. But I use a multitude of sources. A lot of times, just because with Scotland's people, if I want to actually see a copy of the record, a physical copy, I might have to. There's a fee associated, so a lot of times I'll do my research on Family Search or Ancestry or My Heritage, and find the record and pretty much determine that it's what I want, but I want to see an actual copy of it. I'll go to Scotland's people and then print it out. And yeah, and you know, surprisingly, Google can be an amazing resource. You know, I found a 2-hour interview, almost a 2-hour interview of my great grandmother that I didn't know existed. Nobody in my family knew it existed. She had moved to Cape Breton in 1905 from Scotland, and her husband, whose family's been there for a while, but he was a miner, and they lived in a small little coal mining town, and somebody had been doing academic research on coal miners and coal miners' life. So there was this beautiful recording I found because of Google. I found that it existed. I couldn't get it offline, so I was able to contact the archive where it was, get them to send me a digital copy, and I learned so much interesting little, just her telling stories that I never knew. I mean, I hadn't seen her since I was 6 years old. She died a couple of years later, and you know, had these wonderful stories. Just even hearing her voice, she still had a strong Scottish accent after being in Canada for what, been 72 years at that point. She still had, you know, her accent. It was the one I remembered. So, and that was just a happenstance in Google. I just happened to find it because I was been looking for I was trying to look for some images of the community which she was from for another project I was working on, and I stumbled across it. So those are some of my favorite finds and favorite resources, is the ones that are unexpected.
Totally not jealous of that, I will admit.
Oh, I mean, a lot of people I know. I even listen to my mom. She liked hearing her grandmother's voice again, but she isn't into it as much as I is.
Yeah.
And but it was just hearing you know, the stories about my grandfather and his brother when they had colic. They took them down the coal mine and they laid them on the floor of the coal mine to help. Not colic. It was whooping cough to help get it better. And that was so it was just little things like that. You know, I always remember my grandfather, whenever he came visit, he always made baked beans, the really best baked beans. I torment my wife that she can't make them as good. And but that was something she was talking about. She did every Saturday, and she was talking about that. And it was just, oh, that's where my grandfather got it from. It's not something I knew. And so just hearing those things. And like I said, I stumbled across it. It wasn't, I hadn't gone looking for it. I didn't know it existed. Nobody in my family knew it existed. And I was able to take it, and it was part of a longer series, and cut it down, and then share with other family members who had never met her or had were of my generation or one above that, you know, hadn't heard from her, and they were just as excited as I was to hear her voice. So
I can imagine. I mean, if you kind of said my two friends' great grandfather, I mean, they would have died in the 1920s, I think ish. But even still, I mean, my mum could just about remember, my great grandfather's voice because he died when he was 16. I'm not sure. I'm probably wrong. And like my grandfather who died 4 years ago, I'm lucky to have his voice on him. Like he had this very very infectious laugh.
Yeah.
When you heard it, it was very laugh along with him. That was the kind, and I mean, yeah, it was nice, and just kind of thinking of it, because in Ireland we had this TV channel called RTE Radio Television, which is the Irish for Radio Television Ireland. It's just the Irish form of it, and they did this. They did this documentary on a ballet dancer called Joan Denise Moriarty, and the I'm trying to remember the connection, but my mom and dad were just kind of flicking through the TV guide or whatever, and they were just flicking channels, and then they stopped for a bit while they were looking for something, and they heard my grandfather's voice, and they were thinking, "Right, what happened here?" And they watched it a little longer, and it was actually him talking about this woman, Joan Denise Moriarty, and because he had. I don't remember whether he was because he was a student either Tilly Fleischman or Alois Fleischman, who was a conductor, as he went on to pursue music in life. And like there was like this, you'd see these like still graphics, or so like you just see these still images of kind of in kind of one, but it was just like my granddad kind of like lying back with like his hands behind his head, and it was just like as if and this is like a couple of years after he died, so it was still pretty raw for me in the sense because I hadn't really heard his voice, and yeah, and just after talking about this, I am definitely going to be watching it after this. But no, I mean that's the only kind of good thing. But apart from that, I mean I wouldn't have had that look, and it was only because my flicked through the TV guide. And for the director of that, now this is a funny thing. The director of that is actually a distant cousin to me on my mother's side. So you have my great grandfather. She descends from a sibling of him, and it was only when I actually reached out to someone on that side of the family that that they didn't know the connection. Because my grandfather, no, my grandmother, she had. I've forgotten where I was going with this. But but like it was only when we kind of figured out, the familial connection that kind of we thought, oh my god, if only we knew, sort of thing. Because I mean, my gran has been dead for 27 years, so I mean. They didn't really know her. I mean, it was a distant connection, but I mean, it was the fact that I couldn't believe it when I heard that oh well, wait, so you're related to this person, and then you just kind of add it all up, and you kind of oh, so we are related. That they just realized, and when it previewed at some film festival, it was my grandfather was sitting down, and he was sitting down to the director and her mother, who are my distant cousins, and they had no idea that there was a connection through me to them. But I mean, I hadn't gotten that deep into kind of my tree on that side yet. So I mean, oh, if only in hindsight, a wonderful thing. Anyway. So I think we probably know what projects and adventures you're currently pursuing with podcast and YouTube channel eventually, as you mentioned to me before the stream. Is there any other ones that you want to mention?
Those are the things that I generally do for as far as creative and public content. I also am working on a one-place study for the small community that my great-grandmother that she had settled in, which is why I had been looking for the stuff on the the mining, and I had stumbled across her. Where I'm taking it right now for Canada, our earliest available census is 1921 census. So I'm taking that community. I have everybody tracked, and I'm trying to build up where it was sort of their history and help just facilitate tracking that down for people that are interested in for the community. So I figured that was a good place to start, because I had a good solid instance of who was there, and that was sort of the peak of the community when it had the coal mine was still there, and it had just actually started to develop as a community at that point. So it was a really good starting point. And I have a large population of relatives from there, because that's what my grandfather's whole family was involved in, was in coal mining. On his father's side, they came over to Canada in the late 1700s to start mining. So
Fair enough. I mean, that I like that you did. I have one, um, which is a village, not a village, well, townland, not village. What I'm saying, called Killedan, Killedan. I've sadly neglected it because of everything else that's been happening. I hope to eventually get back to it one day, but I'm not sure if it'll be anytime soon.
yeah,
But given time.
it's sort of a side project, as that I've tried to work on, and I haven't probably put a lot of time into it as much as I would have liked to, but with everything else in life, it's hard to, and I find finding new information about my own family is sort of the priority sometimes, and it takes me off and in tangents. I tend to be easily distracted when I find, because like I said at the beginning, I love history. When I start finding something, and I recently found out my great great second great grandfather was involved in moving this church from one community and actually taking it down river and moving it to another community. And I've just been sort of caught up reading about that and trying to and finding little pieces of information about him and his family in relation to that. So I can't get distracted if I find something really interesting.
Yeah, oh, I know. I think we all have that kind of, oh, shiny, but
Yeah,
shiny new information.
yeah.
Uh, that's primarily it. So is there anything that you now know that you wish you knew when you started?
Well, besides, if I had known all the information, so I didn't have to spend years tracking it down, that would have been great. I honestly, I wish I would have just been more persistent when I was younger. I started doing it before the um, internet was a thing. Um, you know, I remember in university it was very rare. I happened to have access to the internet because I was taking some third year computer science courses, which so it was nothing like we have now. It wasn't basically, there was news groups and uh, not much else for finding information. There was no web pages, no Google, no search engines of any type at that point. And sort of when I started doing genealogy, but that was just looking locally. Um, I do wish that I had taken time when I was younger. My older relatives were still around to actually sit down and talk with them. That's because there's so many things. Uh, yeah, I would just questions I want answered. That my grandfather who passed in 1991 could probably tell me things in his recollection. Um, you know, he was in World War II. I know he went, and when he was in World War II, he spent some time in Scotland visiting his relatives because his mother had immigrated to Canada, and so he still had cousins there. So finding out some of those things and just some of those stories. Yeah, I just wish I actually, when I was younger, had spent the time and take advantage of my relatives to talk with them. When I was young, it wasn't I was interested in my family tree, but I thought about sitting down and talking with my relatives and getting their stories. So so I've been having to piece a lot of them together through information and through hearsay, through talking to cousins. I'm lucky. I have a grandmother who turns 99 in 2 weeks. That's still alive, and her brother is still alive. So, but she's really reluctant to talk a lot about her family, and so. But I've been able to just every now and then ask a few questions and get a few tidbits out of her, like her grandmother, who she's named after, lived to be 100. Because she was talking to that, she said, "Well, I'm probably going to live to be 100. I'm named after her. She lived to be 100." So, which is something I didn't know. Yeah, and she's getting close. But it's that's I just wish I would have had the time to talk and known the questions to ask.
Yeah, something that we all wish. So, what aspects of genealogy do you love the most? Like finding old photos, seeing records, finding mentions of ancestors in newspapers, that sort of thing.
I'm excited by all that stuff. I mean, this is as silly as it sounds. I found my great grandfather's death certificate. My grandfather, who was his son-in-law, signed it, and my grandfather, the one who passed away in 1991, it was his signature. I mean, I know him. Just seeing that. But even when I look at other relatives, when you find documents that they actually signed or they filled out, it's I really kind of get excited, and that's just seeing the virtual ones. I'm not actually physically touching the ones that they saw, but I just get excited because that's this piece of paper that I'm looking at, my great grandfather, my grandfather, my granduncle or grandmother or whatever, that's their signature. That's their information that they wrote down. I get excited by that. Yeah, finding images. I'm the only one in my family that's really into it. Genealogy. My father's brother is on that side of the family a little, but things like this summer we were clearing out my grandmother's house and I found things, and we were going through. My mom just wanted to ditch, but I found these. I meant to have them here, but I have them packed away because I've been, like I said, doing some renovations in my house, so they've been packed away. Was from World War II. My grandfather was anti-aircraft gunner, so he was in a lot of the larger battles where the Canadians were going to be fighting. They sent his regiment, his division in first. So he was at D-Day. He was in the invasion of Italy, and when the Canadians pushed into Germany. But I found this box of these silk handkerchiefs embroidered, and it was a souvenir for my wife, Rome, 1945. It was just, that was really exciting. My mom had just wanted to throw those out, and they're just little handkerchiefs, but it's just a really neat thing. I thought, that was that was from my grandfather. He got that from my grandmother. I can just picture it. He was probably going into Rome, and there was, the a little Italian woman selling these on the road or whatever, doing these, just selling this, and he brought it back for his wife. I have this. I don't know if you. It's a Bible that, nothing exciting. Doesn't have my family history in it or anything. It's just, but it was one. It was sent to my grandfather for Christmas in 1944 when he was in Europe fighting. So, um, just finding that is like, it's exciting because I know it says from Kay, which could have either been his sister-in-law or his mother-in-law, and they sent that to him to read. I'm assuming he read it. He kept it. The fact it made it back from the war, it's really kind of, yeah, touching those things. Like I said, that I know my relatives have touched. Going to those places my relatives have been or are from. I find that, yeah, just fascinating because, um, you know, it's a connection I can make with them.
Yeah. No, I do agree. And I mean, it's kind of one thing that I kind of have, but I don't have many. It's like it's a coin originally, but was made into a necklace by my grandmother, and it was a coin with her parents' names in Irish and marriage date, and that's years old. So I mean, it's been passed. Mum and me have it now. So yeah, it's nice when you have something that was going to belong to them. So
Definitely.
yeah, it does kind of bring it out and make you just love it. And going back to my grandfather, I remember because one thing I was always obsessed with was like getting post because I never got any. And when my granddad, he would tend to go to Morocco every now and again. When he did, he'd sort of send me a little postcard from Morocco, and I was happy. I was probably like 7 or 8 at the time, and
Yeah.
it was like, yeah, I got posts. It's from granddad, and yeah, I mean, I still have those. Still, and this like little wooden organ and desk tidy thing, and yeah, I still have them, and yeah, they ain't leaving. So yeah. So what's an interesting story or event that you've discovered about your ancestors?
Um, as I said, I'm a proud Celtic Canadian, being Scottish and Irish heritage. Um, so it was really, really kind of shocked and disappointed that, um, I was related distantly to Edward Longshanks. Um, I actually, one of my 6 great grandmother on my father's side, I was able to, I call her a gateway ancestor. I was able, once I found her, there was enough written history about her parents, and so on, that I was able to get back quite far, quite easily, and it had already, a lot of it had already been well researched. That's the one thing I warn people. Make sure you check your sources, make sure they're legitimate sources. But I was able to get back, and when you get back a certain far point, you're related to a lot of people. I figured out your 25th great grandparents. You have I think it's 12 million of them. So that would have brought me back around that time, and I actually have the connections, but he's actually my 24th great granduncle and also my 24th great grandfather. Because it's connected in multiple ways. I'm sure I'm connected more, but it's just when you get that far back, like I said, I'm more great grandparents than are people that lived in the British Isles at that period. So you're bound to be related to them if that's where your family's from. So I always joked, whenever I've done my DNA tests on different places, I always come up, I don't have any English, so I'm really always excited by that. As being a good Celt, but So that was kind of interesting. But one of my favorite little stories is that's sort of a little closer is my great grandmother that came over here in 1905. She came here, and I was having a hard time tracking down when she's born because there was different things. Depending what I looked at, she changed her date of birth a few times. So when I found her immigration records in 1905, it said that she was 11 years old coming to Canada. She was born in 1892. I have confirmed that now without a doubt. It's what's on her tombstone, but through other sources, and I had also been able to finally nail it down. But this was really telling for me because for a while I wasn't able to find the immigration records. I wasn't sure what the right ones were. There was either the one that I thought that the age was off, or there was one that had perfect age and the right father's and mother's name, but they actually had immigrated in the States. So I wasn't sure if they had been to the States first and moved up, which would have been a very common thing at that time. But so doing some investigating, I found out that, they lied about her age because if she was over 12, they would have had to pay a higher rate for the crew, the ship across for her than if she was under 12. So, it's in true Scotch fashion. They want to save some money, so they fudged on her age. And I found that really interesting because my wife tells a story about when she was 3 years old. She flew down to the United States she was just over 3, so she was able to talk and stuff. But they hadn't told her it was her 3rd birthday. At this point, they didn't check IDs on planes, and especially with kids. It's way pre 9/11, so they didn't tell her birth. It had been her birthday because they didn't want her blabbering on the plane that she was 3. So likewise, I'm assuming they did a similar thing with my great grandmother, that they made it so then anybody asked, she was 11, though she would have been, based on her birth records that I've been able to find and other things since, that she was definitely over 12. So she was 13 in a couple months. So,
right.
So it was I just found that kind of interesting because I always have this picture from my memories of her being pretty straight-laced, lady. I mean, even I remember, when I used to go there as a kid on Sunday, the TVs would be, she had it covered with like tablecloths until after supper, and then it would come off. But so she was a church going lady, and so it was kind of really, I had always thought that was the way she was brought up, and so the fact that her family had did this was kind of it was just interesting. It was a kind of a neat little story, and it was one, like I said, it's relatively close. Another one. This is me being a 50-year-old man when I discovered this. So last year, one of my great grandfathers, I found him in a directory in the city, and it listed his occupation as a cordial manufacturer. And I thought, oh, that's really nice. They pointed out that he was a polite young fella, not putting 2 and 2 together and realizing they meant cordial as in the drink. And it was funny. Then the next year, the directory, that's when I found the next year, and I found them in it. I found an ad. He actually made brewed a ginger ale that apparently he had the rights for this ginger ale from Belfast from Dr. Brown, who I've never been able to find out who that was. I've found no reference of it when I've tried to search for ginger ales by Doc Brown from Belfast. But he claimed to have the rights to produce it in Canada. So.
Well, I guess you'd have to take his word for it. I mean, that's all
Yeah.
you can really do. You can't just kind of say, "Hey, can you just clear this up?"
But I
You'd
just
like
found,
to.
yeah. So I mean, that's a story of my own naivety on the cordial manufacturer, taking a bit to clue in that it wasn't that he was a very polite fella. It was informal. He was just it was actually the cordial drink. So yeah, it's just there's another source I think are great directories. You find out a lot of things in it, especially if you can get year after year. You can find out those movements of people um, within your family, if they have kept accurate addresses up. Um, so yeah, and you can find out information as far as occupation. You can find out when their occupation changes, because his actually changed a few times. It was cordial. He had been one. He was a merchant. Then he was a cordial manufacturer. Then he was still a cordial manufacturer, but also importer, exporter. There was different things in different years, so I could see just as his business developed what he was doing. So.
Yeah, I think that's what you can get from that. I mean, I haven't had much luck with the directories, but I'm still trying.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a matter if you find them and they have that information, it can fill out stuff that you're not sure, and
Yeah,
you can, like I said, you can see where they might have changed things. Voters lists are surprisingly, we have in Canada voters lists. You can find a lot of those online are interesting tidbits of information as far as tracking movements within a community. If you had relatives that moved from house to house, street to street, you can find sort of that progress. You can find, just especially when like I was saying, our census is, we don't have anything before 1921 yet available. After 1921, so you can find
yeah,
some information about communities there as well, and community names.
yeah. So, what type of record do you like the most, and why? If you have one.
If I have a particular record, um, I, I like um, I like marriage records, and I like death certificates, because death certificates give you a lot of information on them. Um, they have, you can find out, usually has their spouse's name, usually has their parents' name. Um, so you can find out those things which you might not find elsewhere, specifically for female relatives. Um, you can find out that Canadian censuses are really good as far as trying to track down um, where people are from, because um, they actually recorded their nationality, if they were a Canadian citizen, if not where they were from, what language did they speak, um, you know, what their ethnic heritage was, what they self-identified as. You get a lot of that information that can help you. I know when I've helped other people be able, that weren't sure on their family heritage, be able to go back and look and at least get an idea of where to start looking. And they have the um, the year that they, some of them have the year that they came to Canada, that they were naturalized, has their mother and father's names, whether they were Canadian citizens, where they were born. So those things, when you have all that extra information, is a, it's just helps lead you to find the other things that you're looking for. So you're looking in the right places, so you can find the birth records. Um, so I really find, anything that has solid information that you can trust, to me, is a good record. But I yeah, death certificates I find great. Census information. Um, you got to be aware of censuses because it is information that was told from one person to the person that's recording it. And like I said, that I was doing that community, I found this one name and I had never heard of it. It was just the person spelled their name wrong. The looking for birth dates wasn't very accurate because if it was this was 1921, if you said you were 21, he assumed you were born in 1900. Not could have been born in 1899, depending on because the census was done in May. If your birthday was after May 1st, so he made a lot of assumptions. He assumed spellings of last names, which is when you're looking at areas with a lot of Scottish people, there's Mix and there's Max. So he I'm assuming it's a he. I can't remember if it was that had done it. Everybody was a Mac, whether they actually were a Mick and their family identified, and I find the records of the family as Mix. He assumed spellings. He spelled things phonetically. He didn't. So, you have to be careful on it, but it was great though, having that information because you can't really misspell Irish, Italian, Scottish, English as far as, well, you can, but not enough that I think most people wouldn't get an idea that, okay, this is, so he was asking those questions. At least I assumed he was, because there was a wide variety of people from places that I would not have suspected that had lived in that community at that time too. But I did find that with the ages and names, he made a lot of assumptions. Like there was a whole family that had lived in a couple of different places. He wrote their last name as Persons, but it's actually Parsons. So, it's just finding that information and then verifying it elsewhere, but it gives you a place to look.
Yeah. And I mean, I get what you mean with kind of, the mistranscriptions, because I mean, I had a case where I was trying to find a great grand uncle of mine, and he was Thomas Loftus, and he was written in as so Loftus Loftus, but this is transcribed as Lefthus. I don't get where he was getting the H from. But then when I looked at the record, it looked like that. And I'm thinking anyone in their right mind would have thought, well, that doesn't seem like a surname. No, what would be? And then they kind of thought, oh, Loftus sounds possible. They probably would have put that down. I don't know. But I mean, you have to try anything.
Yeah,
I've learned.
Especially if you're looking at immigration records in Canada, a lot of times it is really hard because the immigration person, a lot of times they spelled what they were familiar. My wife's great grandparents were from Finland. Their name wound up being Johnson when they moved to North America, just because that's how the immigration person heard it, and that's what he wrote down, and it was it was an anglicized version of the name. So when you go back and you try to translate that and look for them back in Finland, you're not going to find them under that last name. I have an example. I have my mom's aunt. She married a McGinnis. They had 6 kids, and I'm sure each one of them spells their last name differently.
Right.
So I have some that are MACINNES, MACINNIS, MCINNIS, IMCINNES. It's just like they're, and that's in the same family as adults.
Yeah.
One of them, his name is actually John, but apparently there was 6 other Johns that lived in his neighborhood. So his mom couldn't yell at John to come home come in for dinner, because she'd have like the whole neighborhood kids all coming because they were all John. So he got started to be called Timmy. It's not in middle name, nowhere in an official record, but
Right.
yeah, that's how I always
As
knew
you
him.
do.
So it's just, yeah, it was just his name was John Vincent, and we always called him Timmy. I mean, he's only a few years older than me, but yeah, um, just interesting stories like that. I'm never, if I was looking for any kind of records, I'm not going to find a birth certificate under his name, because that's not it. If I hadn't known the story, so yeah, you have to be careful and make assumptions, not make assumptions sometimes, and sometimes you have to, because um, it's like that sounds like that name, and everything else seems to match. It's probably that person, and it was just yeah, bad record keeping, bad transcription at some point.
Yeah. Right. So I'm almost getting to the end of my question. So if anyone watching wants to contribute anything, please do. So with that out of the way, what does genealogy mean to you?
Genealogy, what does it mean to me? It's honestly about understanding your history. I said that it's sort of at the beginning. I find in the 21st century, there's a lot of revisionist history. There's a lot of history that is trying to become politically correct. So people are losing touch with what is actually their history. There's in North America, there's we're tearing down statues of some people, which yeah, they probably should be, and some that aren't. Some people that made you know one, like for instance, Canada's first prime minister, John A. Macdonald. He was involved in developing he was prime minister when they started the native residential schools, which turned out to be a mess. But he also did a lot of great things. He was our first prime minister. He basically forged this country together. He put the National Railroad together. He brought Western colonies from what's Western Canada now into Confederation, and basically made Canada what it is today. Um, you know, based on that one bad thing, should we be getting rid of him and erasing him? No. But knowing your own history, knowing what your family was doing at those different periods of history can make a big difference. Even understanding it, um, you know, uh, this one thing a lot of people don't realize: in the 1800s, there were signs up in large cities in Canada and United States that said no blacks or Irish. So the Irish North Americans had sort of been in the same class as far as their some of the discrimination. People don't understand that because they don't know their own history. But just even finding it right when you find out why people left their own country to come here. I said my grandfather, some of his family, they came over here because they were coal miners. They were coal miners in Scotland because they had been part of the Highland clearances, and they had started mining coal in Scotland, and then they eventually came over here. Had other members of the Scottish side of my family that basically were burned off their land and wound up coming to North America. My family that came over from Ireland during the potato famine. Understanding those type things really helps me understand it and also appreciate it. Appreciate your local community, your local histories of where they're from. It's really all about trying to place history in a personal context. Trying not to just take other people's words for it, because history has been changed. It used to be, that my feeling is we learn from the past and we change our values so we don't make those mistakes. But now a lot of times it's like there's a movement to change history based on the values. So we're actually going back and trying to deny things or make things, we really don't like that part of history. So let's try to forget about it. Or just even a not understanding it. But when you kind of have that personal investment in your understanding, because you want to understand your family, understand where you're from, it helps you, just be more aware of it. There was a lot of things in history. Yeah, definitely. By our 21st century morals, they're wrong. They were wrong back then, but it's part of our history. We shouldn't forget about it. We shouldn't praise and glorify it either. But we have to be aware of it and understand. It makes, and by having that personal connection, you can sort of get to the point where, okay, this is what things were like for my family. They were part of it. They weren't, but you know what? Even if they weren't directly, they were living in that time that had happened, and what were they doing at that time, and getting that understanding. It's a, to me, that's what genealogy is. It's about connecting with your own history, connecting with history, finding who you are in your past, finding, I found some things that, I have certain likes, and I have no idea why there's certain things that appeal to me or interest me, but I've been able to find ancestors that had the same likes, or were pursuing similar things, and I had no idea where that came from. It's not something I would think is genetic, but even some values that you realize that those were there from your great grandparents when you start digging into things. Like I said, finding out the beans that I always loved my grandfather made, that his mom made them every Saturday. It was something he ate, and that her mom made them. It was just that, getting those connections, and kind of making them personal, and understanding it. It's your past that makes you what you are today, as much as your own experiences. It's your ancestors had certain experiences that they went through, which shaped them and shaped their values, their life, made them, pass on what they passed on to their ancestors, and some at their descendants. And some things, yeah, you might not even be aware, but where they came from, but why your family does certain things, whether it's eats certain foods at certain times of the year, or just, yeah, different things that have been important to your family over the years. It's kind of making those connections. And
Fair enough. So, final one. So, what advice would you give to a young person starting out in genealogy?
I said it earlier, talk to your relatives. Talk to them while you have them. That it's so important. Also, being a good genealogist to me is also making sure you're keeping those records of your own life to pass on. So your great grandchildren, if they're looking to find out what Daniel's life is like, they'll have a record of it. They'll have those artifacts that,
yes, on YouTube.
They'll have those, on YouTube, those other physical things that are important. So yeah, that's the great thing. They'll have video. They'll know what you. They'll never met you, but know what you look like, know what you sounded like, know, you know, the expressions, the way you laugh, or those type of things. You know, thinking for the future genealogist in your family, or the future person that might have an interest down the road, making sure you're leaving those artifacts for them.
Yeah.
You know, it's and don't discard things that you think aren't important, because some of these things can really come back and help fill in that story later. Um, when you one thing I found helpful with a lot of my closer generation relatives that I've been researching is trying to do a timeline. So I know their life. So for instance, my great grandmother, who was born in 1892, died in 1979, trying to figure out simple things like where she was each year, um, what were major events in her community. That's the other thing. When you're in the genealogy, get yourself interested in local history too. You know, find out, because that if you find out things that were happening, you might not find that personal record of your parents or your ancestor, but you might find that, you know, every year the community they were from had a fall festival or whatever, and you'll understand what the cycle was. Events that, you know, it might not mention by name, but if it was a community event and they were from a small community, you can bet they were probably there. You know, finding out when the church burnt down, or you know, when certain people in the community got married. It might not be your relatives, but if it's a small community, it was probably you probably had your relatives were attached to them somehow, or were aware if these were major events. You know, knowing that local history, and finding good resources, especially, you know, you're looking at 19th, 20th century. There's a lot of stuff that was recorded because we have newspapers, we have um, other sources, a lot of local histories, that you can find, and finding out those things, because it helps put your family into context. And like I said, if you do a timeline, you might not have a thing that you can find because you can't find a specific record for that year, but find something in the community that was an event, or something they would have, you know, that they possibly might have been involved in it, or at least it was on their mind because it was happening in their area. You know, those are things that I think are important, not to and not to get discouraged, because it's hard sometimes. I mentioned I have that one ancestor. Because of them on that one line, I can go way back. But on others, I had my great grandmother, my mom's mother's mother, who I knew in my lifetime, was my other great grandmother. I had no records of her other than the records I knew. I could find her name in my grandparents' marriage certificate. I could find it in her husband's death certificate. I had no marriage certificate for her and her husband. I could not find anything from her, like official records. I couldn't find her in a census correctly. Before, the earliest record I had was my grandparents' marriage. Her name just happened to be as the mother of the bride. But meanwhile, other sides of my family, I've gone back quite far. Her husband's side, I've gone back quite far. I've gone back and found out from the original settlers that came over from Scotland in one generation, even into Scotland. But hers, I couldn't get any farther. And it took me a while. I finally cracked it in the last year, and I was able to at least find out I was able to find some records. Still haven't found the marriage certificate or birth certificate on her, but I was able to find records where I was clearly able to identify who her parents were and her siblings. I didn't even know she had any siblings, and in the past year I've been able to clear them up, and it was discouraging. It was a brick wall that I was pounding at, and every so often I'd go at it again, but it was getting really discouraging. And it was actually one of my guests on my podcast. We were talking about this and afterwards, and she really helped me look at some sources that I wasn't aware of. And we were able to dig in and find a few more things. And then interestingly enough, and the reason that it confirmed what our suspicion was like I said, I didn't know she had any siblings or anything, but in this record we found it was the family we thought would have been her parents. Would have been her brother, whose name was Daniel. And this summer, when I was at my grandmother's cleaning out stuff, I saw a picture. It was of my grandmother's grandfather. So this would be my great grandmother's father, who I didn't know his name, wasn't sure his name, but it had, so my great grandmother as a child, and my grandmother had written back on it that it was mom, grandfather, and Uncle Danny. And I hadn't even known that, like I said, I hadn't been able to confirm, but when I was able to see that, I knew, okay, that matches the record of what I have, and the names matched the record because she wrote her grandfather's name there too. So who I thought, and I had finally come to think, yes, I was able to, in my own mind, confirm, okay, this is them. And it made sense to be able to put that together. I haven't gone any farther. I hadn't gone a generation past yet, but I'm still just getting that information. And I don't think I'll ever find a birth record on my great grandmother, because apparently it was destroyed. In the only birth record at the time was in church files, and the church burnt down in the early 1900s. So there was no record of that. And again, it was one of those things that kept me from finding it. Was I knew her sister. I knew her. I did, when I said I didn't know her siblings, I did know her sister was Aunt Florence, because she actually lived a little longer than my great grandmother. And but I couldn't find her in any records, either of them matching up. And it was because everything that was referenced to her, we knew her by Florence, but her name was Flora. So on her any records that we found. So
fair enough. And I think on that note, we should end. So thank you so much, Brian, for coming on. You've been a fantastic guest with a lot of stories to tell. Not complaining. It was fun.
Oh, no. Thank you very much, Daniel. I really enjoyed it. I enjoy talking genealogy with anybody, anytime. It's, yeah. It's, when it's a passion, you like sharing it, and you like talking to other people and have the same passion. And
absolutely.
I hope your viewers got something out of this, and whether you're watching it live or they're rewatching it later. And you have a great day.
Thanks. And I'll extend that to everyone else watching, and that will watch it. So thanks everyone for watching, and stay tuned for my next guest. See you next